Hello and welcome to this lecture on social media monitoring. So hopefully by the time we get through this chapter, we're going to cover the following topics. And we're going to look at how we go about actually doing the measuring that we've been talking about, for most of the semester here. And then we're going to look at how you evaluate that and what's the impact on social media. And then look at the best practices. So the question becomes, how do you know if you're doing well on your advertising and how much money are you spending? Is it worth the money or not? And so the way that's typically done is with a measurement called return on investment, ROI. And so currently, when this book was written, only about 15% of the people that are investing in ads and social media marketing could actually measure their ROI. So it's something we need to get a better handle on and actually show how we're spending our money and that it's worth spending this money. So if we look at this graph here, we can see that almost half of the people who are using social media marketing haven't shown an impact yet of their dollars. And then 40% have a good qualitative sense of the impact, but they really haven't proven it yet. And then only 15% from the previous slide we see here have actually proven the impact quantitatively, that is, with some kind of numbers. And we can see the importance of being able to come up with the ROI in terms of how much money is going to be spent in social media advertising over the next year or two. And so it's expected to project up to maybe 21, 22%. And it may be higher than that now. And here I've gone out and looked at some more information. We have social media marketing spending in the United States from 2014 through 2019. This is in billions of dollars. And so you can see when our book was written, they were spending about 7.52 million, and now we're up to 17.34 million. That's more than doubled expected by 2019. So again, that ROI, you need to have lots of good information. People are spending this kind of money. They want to know that it's actually working and they're not just wasting their money. So the question is how do we go about tracking to see if the ads are actually working or not? So we have to come up with some metrics, some way of measuring that's going to indicate to us that our ads are working and that it's not because of something else. So you can see on this slide here, you have to think about and use some common sense in terms of where do you want to place your ads, who's your target audience, and so on. So you'll see in this example that there's no point in having a Facebook page for a tequila brand that has many followers if most of them are beer drinkers. So yeah, it might be nice to have that, but in the end, you're not achieving your goal of increasing the sale of tequila because you didn't go after the right audience. And so one way of doing this is to use keywords and search for keywords. Those keywords that are either in blogs, in texts, in reposting of something on the social media site. So when we see that from our ads, we know that the ads at least have been seen. And then we can have some kind of indirect measure in terms of, okay, are sales increasing or not? And one thing that I noticed that when I was going through this chapter and thinking about my previous experiences with social media marketing and looking at Google Analytics is that you got to have a baseline, and they don't mention having a baseline before you start any of these metrics or any of this measuring. So you've got to have some initial information about, how many people are retweeting continuously most of the time, or how many people are visiting your web pages most of the time. Then once you implement your campaign with your ads and things, then you can say, okay, are we seeing something that's above and beyond what we normally get? And so I think that that's really lacking from this chapter. You need to have a baseline measure before moving on to see if whatever you're doing is having a significant impact or not. Because you may just be getting, your normal traffic flow, normal retweets that people are doing, and it has nothing to do with your ads or not. So you need to make sure your ads are having an impact. So the nice thing about using Google Analytics is that you can track those keywords that you're using. And so you can see if people are searching on those, if they've clicked on ads because of the keywords. And so you got to make sure you're doing a good job in terms of identifying those keywords. And so you don't want to use bad keywords because they can mislead or miss the trends that are actually occurring. You can also track hashtags. And so here we have a hashtag for World Cup, and then they were actually, because of these, this has to do with an example of tracking some ads during the World Cup, and they can track those hashtags, and they could see how many times people were retweeting, and then what was the most popular, second most popular, and so on. And then we'll see that in 13.2a figure that this is a direct way to track and set up those hashtags. So if we look at that, you see the ad here, show us your hot sauce face. It says this was for a company called California Tortilla. They wanted to get some brand awareness out there. And so related to that, then we've got, again, show us your hot sauce face. They then show people or direct people on exactly what they wanted to do. And then they're looking at those hashtags and they can actually measure that. Now with Google Analytics, you may not be able to get those hashtags, but if you're doing Twitter, you can probably go into their analytics page and get that hashtag. Also, if you're using something like IBM Watson Analytics, you can go out there and specify a hashtag and actually do some measurement and get some more analytics from that. And so there's different tools out there that will help you get the data, and then you have to analyze the data in terms of, what the popularity of these hashtags were. And so just to make sure that you really understand that we're going to have to do the measurement, you're not going to waste money anymore, you've got to be responsible for the use of that money. So that's going to actually be able to tell us how we're progressing towards achieving our goals. Also looking at how our strategies are performing. And then if we need to make any adjustments, if things aren't working, we need to go back and change some things. One thing that's a little confusing about all the measurement in the social media marketing arena is that sometimes the terminology used in one app is different than the terminology used in another, especially when you're talking about measurements and views and so on. So we're going to actually look at this model in 13.3, and we'll see that we're looking at, this is that value metrics framework we've seen before in terms of measuring exposure, engagement, influence, impact, and advocacy. And so we're just reiterating this. And so how do we get measurements for each one of these items? So in terms of exposure, so it's like, okay, have they actually seen the content? So in Google Analytics, that might be called a page view. In terms of engagement, we might measure that through how long did they spend on the page on average. And that's what Google Analytics will return. In terms of influence, we'll have that clout score. In terms of impact, we'll actually have purchases. Did they go up or down? And in terms of advocacy, is this a reliable customer? We'll look at, are they actually recommending us to their friends on other sources? So maybe a retweet. And will their friends of friends retweet? And so on. Then that's what we call the viral marketing. So we want that as well, but we want to be able to measure how well we're doing across each one of these areas. So some basic terminology is when we talk about a metric could just be a count. It could also be a ratio. It can be quantitative, which is numbers, or it can be qualitative. And a qualitative metric might be, how well somebody feels about something on a score of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. A goal is a broad outcome. Strategy is what approach are you taking to achieve those goals. An objective is always measurable, so it's like a subpart of the goal. What is it that you can measure as you're trying to achieve that goal? In this case, achieve that strategy. But a strategy is the approach you take to achieve the goal. So I always think of it as something that's that makes up the goal. Then from a business perspective, we look at KPIs. And KPIs are key performance indicators, and that is a metric that directly measures the impact on achievement of your business objective. So for us, it might be sales. Are sales increasing or not? And then we've talked about ROI, which is that return on investment. Now, even with return on investment, there is some discrepancy in terms of how do we go about measuring that. And so the traditional way of doing that is we look at income from operations divided by operating assets times 100. Well, that's a little hard to obtain all that information, so they narrowed it down a little bit. And so now it might look like total dollars earned, saved or avoided, minus the total amount that you invested, divided by the total amount you invested times 100. So that being the case, it's a little easier to actually calculate your ROI and then see if that's beneficial to the organization or not. Now the main thing here is that if, and this isn't mentioned in your book, but think about this. If you could invest your money and get 6% and you don't have to do anything, versus you're going through all of this work for social media marketing and you're only doing 4% ROI, you'd be better off to invest your money and not do the social media marketing campaign. And so that's where the issue is. People want to know that the money that they're investing, this denominator value here, is actually going to return more to them than what they could just take that money and invest. And so hopefully that makes sense as to why we're looking at that. And so I would suggest that you go back and you look at that valid metrics framework and determine where your objectives fit into that framework. What is it that you're wanting to get out of your campaign that you're going to run? Right. So if you think about it, for an example, this California Tortilla campaign, what were they looking at? They were looking at the number of likes of each campaign related Facebook post, the number of shares, right? The number of shares of each campaign related Instagram posts, shares on Facebook, the number of customer pictures on Instagram. So they were defining their metric of what they're going to go out and look at. Right? They were also looking at getting customers to post that hashtag on Instagram, and they encourage behavior on Facebook posts. Right, so this was probably their key metric. Right, so those likes and shares on Facebook are useful metrics for looking at the level of engagement with the campaign. Now, if you subscribe to the Facebook analytics, then they'll be able to tell you that reach of each post, right? And that's the number of people the post was served to. And so you don't want to just use it on one social media app. You want to use it on several. So the next figure out of your book shows how this was then used on Twitter, and how it was modified slightly just so that it would work well with that application. So again, you see that people then are retweeting, tweet that out in order to get awareness for the campaign. And so hopefully you recognize now that you can gather a whole lot of metrics from different applications, and you need to be able to define what it is that you're analyzing or gathering the data on, and what does that data mean. And so there's another effect called the Beyonce effect that your book talks about, and that is that, you know, sometimes are you really getting awareness for something because people are retweeting it, or is it because the name happens to be in the hashtag or what people are retweeting or talking about? Right? And so here we're talking about a stadium that led to high brand awareness, right? And so it was a newsworthy event that increased the buzz around the brand significantly. So if we look at that figure 13b, we can see that we have a positive effect for this. The name of the stadium was the MetLife Stadium. And so again, we see sentiment analysis, and that seems to indicate that this is going to be a qualitative and not quantitative kind of metric. And we can see it has very little negative effect on that when people retweeted that out. And so when we go back and look at the metrics here, we can see what people were talking about. We see MetLife Stadium got 34%, Beyonce 11%, Stadium 10%. And so by just having that name and being able to track that, we can see if that was positive or not. So then the question becomes, you know, did MetLife's visibility directly result in sales of insurance, you know, for MetLife? But the data has we have no way of knowing that unless we were looking at, did sales of MetLife go up and it wasn't because of some other reason? But probably not. But did it give us positive brand awareness? And will that positive brand awareness impact on sales in the long run? I mean, who knows, but chances are it probably will. It keeps the MetLife name, the brand, in people's minds, and so when they do look for insurance, they're probably likely to go and at least investigate that. And that's one thing that a company could hope for. And so given these two examples, hopefully you can see how the metrics can be used to give you a glimpse into how the social media metrics can be used towards your marketing and your advertising dollar. And I'm going to pause right there, and when we come back, we'll finish up the chapter.